Hi everyone, happy Friday. Welcome to World History. We are going to cover the last standard from Unit 9, Between the Wars, today. So I just want to remind you about the League of Nations that we discussed after World War I and talk about this picture right here for just a second before we go on. Remember that the League of Nations was an idea by President Wilson of the United States, and he had his 14 points that was a path to peace after World War I. And the purpose of the League of Nations was to prevent future wars. So that World War I would be the war to end all wars, and there would not be any more wars. Well, the Senate in the United States did not ratify this agreement. They did not join the League of Nations. So we have a problem because the US is not in it. And here in this cartoon, it's showing that you have a bridge and you have Belgium, France, England, and Italy. And the keystone, or the most important piece, is the United States. And they are not even in the bridge. So today we're going to look at the failures of the League of Nations leading up to World War II. So go ahead and update your table of contents. Today is the 17th. Sorry about that. And your topic is aggression and conflict before World War II. So today we're going to talk about things that lead up to World War II. So let's look at our standard for today. It says explain the aggression and conflict leading to World War II in Europe and Asia, include the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, the Spanish Civil War, the rape of Nanjing in China, and the German violation of the Treaty of Versailles. So let's go ahead and fill out our little table. You don't have to do it. I just like to do it because it shows us where we're going. So we have people and groups. So I would say for people in groups, we have Italians, Germans, Chinese, and Spanish. Yes. Places and times. Places are going to be Ethiopia. I cannot spell. Ethiopia. Spain, China, Germany, Europe, and Asia. Events and things would be World War II. We'll do the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, Civil War in Spain, rape of Nanjing, and Treaty of Versailles. Action verbs are explain, and we'll do aggression and conflict, okay, because those are leading up to World War II. Okay, so go ahead and make your page look like this. If you need to pause the video at this point so that you can fill this out on your page, I think it makes it more organized. Again, take up the whole page. So you need the first box is after World War I, Japan invades China, Italy invades Ethiopia, German violation of the Treaty of Versailles, Spanish Civil War, rape of Nanjing, aggression, and appeasement. I know it looks like a lot of information, but you're not going to write down very much for each event, so let's get to it. Okay, so after World War I, World War I left many feeling like war no longer had a place in society, and attempts were made to reduce the likelihood of conflict, including the creation of the League of Nations, like we've talked about, which basically renounced war as a tool of the state. But these efforts failed, and by the 1930s, we have a series of regional conflicts that have started. Over the course of the decade, these regional conflicts drew the attention of an increasing number of global powers, and by the 1940s, they culminate in the Second World War. So this is going to show us the failure of the League of Nations as we are heading into World War II and the events leading up to World War II. Okay, the first one is Japan invades China. So in 1931, Japan invaded the northern Chinese territory of Manchuria. Japanese business interests were heavily invested in the region's iron and coal resources. So they basically wanted to go in there to get their iron and coal. The Japanese military used an explosion along with a Japanese-owned railroad in the Manchurian town of Mukden as a pretext for invasion. Once in control, the Japanese set up a puppet government to act like they were giving Manchuria independence, but they really were not. This is imperialism. They wanted to take over the country so that they could take their resources and control the country, but they're acting like they didn't really do that. So the League of Nations responds to this and they say that Japan has to leave. They demanded that Japan withdraw from Manchuria. Japan decides to leave the League of Nations instead. And the Japanese invasion of Manchuria was the first in this series of regional conflicts that lead up to World War II. Here is a map. This is Japan right here. And as you can see, they had already invaded Korea, and then they went into this area called Manchuria, which is in China. Here's an image of Japanese soldiers having citizens surrender. Okay, next is Italy invades Ethiopia. So, encouraged by the League's failure to contain Japanese ambitions in Asia, Benito Mussolini of Italy ordered an invasion of Ethiopia in 1935. Like the Japanese, Mussolini sought to glorify his nation through imperial conquest. He further wished to avenge an Ethiopian defeat of Italy in the 1890s. The Emperor of Ethiopia appealed to the League of Nations for help, but the League condemned the invasion, but none of the great powers did anything to stop him. In fact, the British allowed the Italian military to use the Suez Canal to move supplies and troops to East Africa for the invasion. So again, we see the League of Nations not doing anything. Here is a newspaper that's telling about the event. War begins in Ethiopia. Italy attacks tribesmen. And you can see some images here. For those of you who do not know, Ethiopia is located in Africa. It's in what's called the Horn of Africa. So Italy already had some land here in the Italian Somaliland and here in Eritrea. So they basically just moved into Ethiopia. And Ethiopia was one of the only countries to remain free under the colonization of Africa. Remember when we did the Scramble for Africa activity and you colored in the map of Africa? Ethiopia was one of the only countries to remain free. And I guess Italy tried to take it and they were not happy about that. Okay, next is the German violation of the Treaty of Versailles. In the same year that Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, that's 1935, Hitler announced that Germany would no longer obey the troop limits placed on them by the Treaty of Versailles. The League condemned this move, but they did nothing. In March of 1936, Hitler violated the treaty again by moving German troops into the demilitarized buffer between Germany and France called the Rhineland. While this move stunned members of the League of Nations, they took no action. And Britain argued for a policy of appeasement in the hopes to maintain peace. Appeasement is basically where you give somebody what they want so they will not bother you. But that does not work because then they will just want to take more. Okay? So it's like they're not really being punished they're being allowed to do whatever they want. So in October of 1936, Germany and Italy formed an alliance to which they added Japan in November, and this formed the Axis powers. So you can see that countries are starting to form alliances again, and this is when we're going to get into war. So here's a cartoon showing Hitler kind of sneaking out of the Versailles Treaty here. It's all rolled up, so he's trying to get out of the Versailles Treaty. And here is a map of Germany. This is the area called the Rhineland that we were talking about between Germany and France. And this was a demilitarized zone because this is where the Western Front was located in World War I. So they wanted to keep this area as a safe zone between France and Germany. I also want to point out the Sudetenland, which is this like purplish part of Czechoslovakia. This is where German-speaking people lived, even though they're in Czechoslovakia. And then this, like, I don't know what color this is, like tannish, greenish color, is Austria. And then please notice Czechoslovakia, because I'm going to talk about these three areas in just a minute. Okay, next is the Spanish Civil War. In July of 1936, Francisco Franco, a Spanish general, led a revolt against Spain's Republican government. Franco and his supports in the military wished to establish a fascist regime similar to that of Hitler and Mussolini. A civil war broke out that lasted until Franco's victory in 1939. Mussolini and Hitler both sent troops and equipment to support Franco during the Civil War. Only the Soviet Union supported the forces of the Spanish Republic. So we can see here that the rest of the League of Nations is not doing anything to help out when fascism starts to spread in Spain. So here is a picture of Francisco Franco, the fascist leader of Spain, with Hitler looking happy together. And here is just a picture of troops moving through Spain during the Spanish Civil War. All right, next is the rape of Nanjing in China. So in 1937, German and Japanese aggression continued. In July of 1937, Japan mounted a full-scale invasion of China. The better-equipped Japanese forces advanced quickly, and by December of 1937, they took the Chinese capital of Nanjing. In what is called the Rape of Nanjing, Japanese troops killed 200,000 prisoners of war and civilians and raped 20,000 women. The treatment of the Chinese civilians in Nanjing was savagely violent and public, with many photographers recording the carnage. This was a horrible, horrible event that actually got the United States to come to China's aid because of the photographs of this event that were sent around the world. And this is a very well-known event. So there are some pretty horrific pictures of this event, which I have chosen not to show you. If you want to Google search them, you can, but here's a baby who's left alone, basically at a railroad track. Here's just a bunch of civilians just left out in the road. There are pictures of a baby that has a bayonet going through it. So they basically killed a baby. I mean, it was just horrible, the things that they did to the civilians in China. Just horrible, horrible stuff. So this event actually did have some members of the League of Nations respond because they were so outraged by the carnage that took place. But again, this is showing the continued aggression that I started talking about was in 1931 by Japan when they invaded Manchuria, and then going all the way to 1937. So when we look back at these events, it's easy to say, well, didn't you see what was happening? Because, you've got all of these events taking place and they're trying to get more land for themselves. And didn't you see that war was coming? But we don't view history like that when we're living through it, because it's very hard to connect all of those dots at the time. Okay, so aggression and appeasement. Let's wrap this up. So in November 1937, Hitler announced plans for the Anschluss, which was the unification of Germany and Austria. While this move was prohibited by the Treaty of Versailles, Hitler carried out the annexation of Austria in March of 1938 with little resistance from European nations. In 1938, he turned to the German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland that I showed you on the other page. Hitler demanded that this land be turned over to Germany in September of 1938. German, French, British, and Italian leaders met to discuss these demands in Munich, and Britain, hoping to maintain peace through appeasement, agreed to the German annexation of the Sudetenland at the Munich Conference. In 1939, Hitler took all of Czechoslovakia. With this move, it became increasingly clear that appeasement would not prevent war. It was not working. You can't just give somebody what they want and expect them to stop, because Hitler was never going to stop. And Britain and France pledged to declare war on Germany if Hitler threatened Poland. So I think that what we've covered in this unit is showing you how World War I ended and all of the changes that took place politically with the rise of fascist leaders and the aggression that those fascist leaders, aggressive actions those fascist leaders start to take that are leading us into World War II. So we will have a quiz on Monday, and then we will start into World War II. Okay, I hope you guys have a great weekend. See you later.